So hello there and welcome to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, the show where we take all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula 1 and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending on which platform of course you choose to follow us on. And first of all guys, I just want to apologise for the slight delay of the publication of this podcast. We usually put them out for a Monday. This one's coming out on a Tuesday with our race review and simply because, guys, yours truly wasn't feeling too great and are still really not feeling that good now, right? To be honest. So I'll have to power through. But otherwise, I'm okay. It's nothing to worry about or anything like that. But of course, joining me on this episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, and this is going to be one hell of a juicy review. I can already feel it based on what we saw at the Grand Prix this weekend. But joining me, as always, my co-host, Mr. Courtney Pine. And Courtney, first of all, how are you doing? I know you also are a little bit under the weather. Something's definitely going around at the moment where we are. But yeah, I think now that we've had a day to kind of process everything that's happened, we've been able to go to sleep rather than express our raw emotion and reactions of what we saw over the weekend, as a lot of people did. And listening to a few other podcasts from a few of our friends, other content creators in the community, you can tell everyone was really riled up. But after having some time to process it, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I'm pleased I didn't join the recording yesterday because Adam, you got some angry voice notes on me yesterday when it was all occurring. But I'm definitely glad didn't do it yesterday. I still have my opinions on the matter, and I'm sure we'll be getting some angry rants in the comment section. But at the end of the day, we're here to express our opinions. And our opinions are usually reasonable. They're not usually offensive. They're not usually deliberately said to trigger people, but they still do. So we'll persevere, we'll give our opinions, and then we'll see what comes from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would always encourage all of our followers or listeners, or if you're watching on YouTube, for example, please do weigh in. We are making an effort now to try and engage with you guys more. So if you do want to put a comment in the YouTube video, please do. But of course, let's keep it respectful, guys. We want to have a community or a hub, if you like, where we can all express our opinions. And there are so many different ones. There's no one correct opinion on this. And if you've got a foundation for your opinion on something that's solid and is not used to slander another driver unfairly, then I absolutely welcome it. And we will do our utmost to make sure that we can engage with you guys as well, so we don't make you feel like stuff that you're saying is falling on deaf ears, because it certainly isn't. But obviously we need to do more as content creators to make sure that we are engaging and interacting with our followers who are so kind and generous to offer their opinions.
I completely agree with that. We actually love the comment sections. We love engaging with you when you comment on the videos. But there's just that limit of stating your opinion. And you know what? Passionate opinions are the best opinions, because it shows you're getting like the actual feedback from the race. And that's why we're doing this, Adam. We're here to talk to other people about Formula One, because we don't know many people that are into Formula One. But it's just when you see like remarks about a certain driver, and it's like, look, you don't like that guy for a particular reason, whether it be his personality or other things. But we're here to talk about the racing drivers, not the people. And I just feel let's talk about the racing, because that's what this podcast is about. But of course, bring your opinions, but just keep them reasonable.
Yeah, absolutely right. Couldn't have said it better myself. And again, guys, obviously, if it sounds a little bit croaky or if I sound a little bit off, just shaking off a pretty bad cold or man flu, or whatever you want to call it.
You've been tested. Adam's been tested. It's not COVID.
Yeah, I've already had that once, so I don't really want to have to go through that again. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. But yeah, anyway, look, let's get into this. I want to start with the sprint race. We're going to talk about the big incident between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, but I want to save that for a little bit later on in the episode. Once we've warmed up and we're really into this, we can have a proper go at it, I suppose is the best way of putting it. But the sprint race, we had the sprint race, ended up serving as a rather moot point for the weekend. Obviously what followed in the main event, which you'd expect it to under the normal circumstances anyway. But we had the first one in Silverstone. I think a lot of us, us included, felt that it did okay. It wasn't fantastic, but it did provide some action and it was somewhat entertaining. And I think we can all agree that having a short sprint race over a extra practice session where nothing is really achieved from it is always a plus. But I got to be honest, I was not enthralled at all by what I saw in this sprint race. Of course, I was looking forward to it, but after it had happened, I was like, what? Not really much happened. I mean, the only thing I could think of was an early overtake or two by Fernando Alonso, as he so often does, and seems to be the lead protagonist in this sprint series, as he was in Silverstone. And Lewis Hamilton getting a poor start, which dropped him onto the second row of the grid for the main race. So, yeah, Courtney, any thoughts you wanted to lend to the sprint race?
Of course. I think you're right. I think the main point from the sprint race was the poor start from Lewis, which could have big implications for the championship. Obviously, with what happened on Sunday, the implications could have been even worse. But I was disappointed by it personally. I was expecting more from it, given the layout of Monza. We saw it did fairly well in Silverstone. But yeah, it was a bit of a damp squib. I think that's the term. But yeah, I wasn't really too keen on it. It was a little bit of a procession, and we see that way too often in Formula One. For me, I'm glad that this is only a trial. And if I was one of the big wigs at the top of the Formula One ladder, let's say, I would be keen to stick with the original format next season. And if the 2022 cars have the desired effect where it's easy to overtake, then consider it for certain tracks in 2023. Because I think I was talking about it in the commentary in the UK that the guy chasing had to be about 0.4 of a second behind the guy in front by the time they get to the straight in order to make an overtake in Monza. It's just a common concept of these cars. It's still generally too difficult to overtake even with DRS. So let's just hope the 2022 regulations have the desired effect, and then maybe bring it back at some circuits. But even then, a circuit like Monaco, it'd be absolutely pointless to do it. So it definitely needs some fine tuning.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that's one thing we saw this weekend, that unless you're right up someone's gearbox at the exit of the Parabolica corner, now named the Alboreto corner, you're just not going to make that overtake. Even with DRS, it just shows how difficult Monza has become to overtake. And it's quite deceiving because you'd think it would be an absolute haven for overtaking. But no, we saw, of course, the weekend, even in the main race, how hard it was to overtake at the final corner, going into turn one of the run off of Parabolica. So, yeah, I as I said, I watched that sprint race, and I don't think I was massively disappointed or felt like I was shortchanged or anything. We had the sprint race at Silverstone. We gave it a thumbs up. It wasn't an enthusiastic thumbs up, but we were happy with what we saw the first time. And it felt a lot more, it felt like a damp squib, as you perfectly put it, Corny. I don't feel that the experiment that they were hoping for to really thrive and flourish at Monza was really going to deliver. And perhaps some people felt that was going to happen before it even started. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see how it goes. We're supposed to have one more sprint race in Brazil, possibly, but that's going to depend on whether that race goes ahead in Brazil owing to the COVID situation there. We did get a few drivers off in their remarks on this. Sergio Perez was actually very vocal about the sprint race. I've got the quotes here that I'll just read on my phone, and he said it was very boring. He said F1 sprint races don't really bring anything. He doesn't see the benefit, and he can imagine it's also boring for the fans, boring for the drivers, and yeah, he just goes on to say just doesn't feel like it's going to improve the show, and that we'll just have to wait and see if the fans are happy with it. I mean, we've asked some of our followers before, and majority of them are in agreement with us that they wanted to see this work. They wanted to give it a try. I think we were quite open-minded to the idea. I mean, I know originally when we talked about this months and months and months ago when they were discussing it, and I said I wasn't a fan of it because I'm a traditionalist in terms of F1 fans. I'm not adverse to new ideas, but sometimes I feel like artificially trying to create more exciting racing through a race format rather than trying to make the cars better at racing each other is the wrong way to go. And we're now entering a period, in theory, where we're going to get what we want in terms of close racing through the cars, which in turn could make a sprint race more appealing. But I just feel like you've got to try and, if you're going to improve the show for the fans, you've got to make the cars more competitive and make them better at racing. And I think fans, by and large, have been very happy with what we've seen this season because of how competitive it has been and how much of and the battles that we've had up and down the paddock, rather than what we've seen the last couple of years or through the sprint races, which have certainly not achieved that at all.
I completely agree with your opinions on the format. I, for one, really enjoy qualifying. Now, I know there is still obviously a qualifying session for the sprint race itself, but for me, I think the importance of qualifying should go back to how it was, because that's one of the arts of being a Formula One driver, being able to nail that perfect lap in all sorts of conditions, and you should get that reward for it. You know, with this format, after qualifying, you have 2 bites of the cherry rather than one. I just feel that, you know, you think about some of the great qualifiers in the past, like Lewis and Ayrton Senna, you know, their achievements would have kind of been diluted if it was with this current format. So if you think about Senna at Monaco in '88, when he went 2 seconds faster than his teammate, that wouldn't have had as much gravitas with this current format. So I just think the art of qualifying needs to be given a little bit more respect.
Yeah, absolutely right. You know, people aren't going to talk fondly in F1 folklore about the time where Valtteri Bottas become the speed king at Monza, or when Lewis become the speed king. When Lewis become the speed king at Silverstone or won the sprint race. They're going to be talking about Senna's pole lap in '88 in Monaco, Hamilton's pole lap in Singapore 2018. I believe it was. He completely pulled that one out of the bag, and also his 100th pole position at the Spanish Grand Prix. He got his 100th pole.
I think so.
It was that one, because I remember. Yeah, it was that one. You know, people are going to be talking about those moments. They're not going to be talking about who won a sprint, or it's not even a sprint race. It's meant to be a sprint. So, yeah, I think the enthusiasm that we might have had for the sprint series after the British Grand Prix has kind of wavered a lot. And I think if they are going to introduce a sprint event into the F1 format, they really have to have a serious think about where they're going to have it. Because I think if you're just going to have it at races where we've had it so far, Silverstone, yeah, maybe, but Monza, absolutely not. Unless they change the way the cars interact with each other in terms of making it easy to overtake, it's just not going to work. And that has to be the priority. So let us know what you think, guys. Did you enjoy the sprint race, or do you feel that perhaps perhaps it was just a step too far for what F1 wanted to achieve at this race, and ultimately was probably a bit of a failure? I mean, it didn't look like there was too much going on other than what the incidents that we'd already mentioned. The headline did seem to be Hamilton dropping a few places because of his poor start. And yeah, that was about it, really. But look, let's move on to the main race, and there's so much that we can talk about from this race. But I think it's fair for us to shine the spotlight on the winners of the Italian Grand Prix. And, you know, it's funny because I always think back to the 2021 predictions that we did with Menena, a Goal Talks F1, of course, otherwise known as. And we were all in agreement that we thought that McLaren would win a Grand Prix in 2021. Mm-hmm. And at the time, that probably seemed like a bit of a bold prediction. And I think as the season went on, it became more and more bold. Like, McLaren were always on the cusp, but there was always at least 3 or 4 cars that were always in contention to be more likely to be able to win than they would. And I don't know, I just felt, would they get there? Would they be able to get the win? Would there be a day when everything just falls right for them? And it very much did so at the Italian Grand Prix. And I must say, it was absolutely thoroughly deserved. And whilst admittedly my allegiances in Formula One are with the Tifosi, with Ferrari at a weekend like at Monza, I can't think of another team I'd rather have seen win other than the Ferraris than McLaren, and more so than Daniel Ricciardo, who got the win. You know, his first win in such a long time. I think it was 2018 in Monaco Grand Prix. He was still a Red Bull driver when he won his last race in F1 before that one. A driver that's so good at winning on the occasion when opportunities arise, but this was completely different. Yes, opportunities arose from a few of the leading contenders in Verstappen and Hamilton taking each other out, and of course we'll get into that later. But he was leading the race on merit before that even happened, and for a time, I just couldn't see anybody beating him on the day. He was just in that unique position where he was out in front, He got a fantastic start, and Verstappen couldn't get near him because of the nature of the track, and the Red Bull just couldn't get past the McLaren. And he didn't threaten him either. Ricciardo had that under control. And as I said, it culminated in a fantastic result for the team where they got a 1-2 finished, thoroughly deserved. And, before we go into the statistics, it was an incredible day. Courtney, obviously you've had your support for McLaren in the past, particularly when Lewis was there early in his career. How special was it for McLaren to finally break their 9-year hoodoo and get a Formula One win at a track like Monza?
Oh, absolutely amazing. With McLaren, I think McLaren are a lot of people's first or second team. I think firstly because of obviously the history of the team. Like for me, I'm not only fond of McLaren because of the Lewis era, also because of the Senna era. The Marlboro era, McLaren, like they're just iconic, and I always have a fondness for the team. But the job that Zach Brown has done at McLaren has been absolutely fantastic. He really has turned that team around. If you have a look at the team a few years ago, that was struggling with Honda and Fernando Alonso. This guy's come along. We've got Andreas Seidel as well, and it's such a good feel about McLaren. And we discussed this in if we go back to pre-season and saying there's a momentum, there's a feel good factor about McLaren, and having two drivers like Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, particularly with Lando's transformation this season, where they like to have a laugh, but they're also fierce competitors. And I just think that energy feeds through that whole team where, they're enjoying life being in the F1 paddock, but they still have that desire to win. And it come to show. I think McLaren have put together a solid car. They've always been there or thereabouts, just behind Mercedes and Red Bull. But they were there on merit this weekend. It's so easy to think, because Max and Lewis hit each other, that's the only reason why McLaren won. If Lewis had stayed on track, he was on a decent strategy. There's no guarantee that he would have got ahead of those guys because Lewis struggled to get past them on the during the sprint. So it wouldn't have been a foregone conclusion that Lewis would have caught up. And, it's great. It's great for Daniel, given the season that he's had. We all know the guy's still good, but he's just gone into a new team with a completely different setup and he struggled to adapt. But the first opportunity he had to win a race, he took it. And it was just a reminder for his doubters that this guy is more than capable of doing a job for McLaren. And I'm really pleased for him because it must have been a struggle for him.
Yeah, it was very much a wholesome victory. I mean, I'd have loved to have seen Lando win that race, but given how the weekend went down and how good Daniel Ricciardo was, he was easily the better of the two McLaren drivers this weekend. Lando was incredibly impressive as well, let's not forget. Fourth in the sprint and second in the main race. He did a phenomenal job as well, as he has done so often this season, but there was just something really special about Danny Ric getting the result. And you pointed it out, Corny, it's probably because he's had such a hard time adjusting and acclimatized into this car that he come to a circuit where he's been very strong at in the past in his Red Bull days and even for Renault, and it just felt really, really nice to see him get that result and how much it meant to him as well. It really, really did. And to the team as well. We can't ignore the fact that McLaren have really been building the blocks and the foundations that they needed to get back to the top of Formula One. I mean, it almost seems like a team like McLaren is expected to rise to the top of Formula One almost in a heartbeat. But it's not as simple as that. I think you can see how the likes of Ferrari have struggled to get themselves back to the top, where they're now in that position like McLaren, where you feel like they're going to be there sooner rather than later. But it's just been such a struggle for McLaren over the last 7 or 8 years. I mean, just to give you some perspective, guys, for those of you that obviously haven't followed McLaren for a very long time, or Formula One, just to explain how significant this win was for McLaren. Their last win was at the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2012, I believe, when Jenson Button won that race, and that was 9 years ago. 3,213 days, I believe it was, to be exact. The first win for Ricciardo since Monaco 2018, that was when he was at Red Bull, of course. It was Lando Norris's best ever finish. Never finished in P2, got a lot of P3s, but never P2 before. It was the first 1-2 finish of any team this season. That includes Red Bull and Mercedes. McLaren obviously did that first. The first 1-2 finish for McLaren since Canada 2010.
Wow.
And you know how long ago that was? Lewis Hamilton was driving for them, and he won on that day ahead of Jenson Button. That's how long ago it was. It was McLaren's first win, obviously in the turbo hybrid era, as a result. It was also the largest ever points haul for a McLaren, for McLaren. 43 points they got for the 1-2 finish, 1 point for Ricciardo's fastest lap, and another point for Ricciardo's third place in the sprint. And it's the second largest points haul from an individual driver in Formula One ever. Only 1 point less than Lewis Hamilton at the British Grand Prix. So an incredible bunch of stats there for Daniel Ricciardo. And it just sums up how brilliant this day was for McLaren. I mean, we can talk about the battle with Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. And of course, as a result, that has really helped their cause. And they've now overtaken Ferrari, if you like, to move into P3. But when you sum it all up, Courtney, for Daniel Ricciardo in particular, you know, we can go on and on about Lando Norris, and to be honest, I'm not surprised by the result for Lando. I'm very impressed, actually, by what he did on the team radio. I don't know if you heard it. There was a moment where
I did, yeah.
He basically said that, look, we need to hold... Do you want me to hold position and not fight Danny over this position? Because obviously we can get a 1-2. And McLaren suggests that is our position. We want you to stay in P2. Don't fight Daniel. And it reminded me of the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix, where Damon Hill and Ralf Schumacher, both for the Jordan team at the time, ended up in 1 and 2 after Michael Schumacher crashed into the back of David Coulthard, and obviously took them both out of the race. And Jordan found themselves in a 1-2 position. This was a very rare position because Jordan were like a midfield team at the time. They weren't, they were fighting for decent positions, but they were nowhere near good enough to be winning races on merit. And they found themselves in this position, and Damon Hill was driving for them at the time. And he said on the radio, and he was leading the Grand Prix, and he said to Eddie Jordan, who was running the team, that if Ralph and I fight, there's a chance that we may not be able to consolidate this position. And Ralf Schumacher was faster than Damon at the time, so Ralph wanted to try and win. And then he basically said, you need to step in to Eddie Jordan and give the orders to hold position, or we won't win this race. And eventually he did, and Jordan were able to consolidate that 1-2 finish. That radio message from Lando, obviously with the intention to support his team rather than go for his own aspirations, because a potential first Grand Prix win for Lando Norris was very much on the cards for him there. But he did the sensible thing to bring the result home for his team. And for Danny Rick as well, Courtney, it's an incredibly special moment. I mean, could this be a pivotal moment in Daniel Ricciardo's career, at least at McLaren, that could help him put more performances, not necessarily like the one he put in at the weekend, but more like what Lando Norris has been doing this season?
Well, of course it can. We've been waiting for it all season. We've all been waiting for that moment where Daniel's going to turn it around, because, you know, even during his time during Renault, he was pulling these kind of results out of the bag. You know, so we've all been shocked by his form at McLaren. Every weekend we've been saying, is this going to be the weekend? Is this going to be the weekend? I think we can actually safely say, as disappointed as we've been, we've never ruled him out. We've never said, oh, he's done, he's washed up. We've never said that on this podcast. We've been waiting every weekend for it to happen. And this is the best opportunity he's going to get. So I'm really hoping that he does take this momentum into the rest of the season, because he's going to want to be number one driver. It's going to be interesting. If Daniel's form picks up, it's going to be interesting to see how the dynamic between the two drivers changes. But yeah, I'm just really pleased with the guy. And I will always have a soft spot for McLaren. So for me, if Lewis doesn't win, I do want to see the McLaren guys win. So I hope they continue the way they're going.
Yeah, it was a beautiful end to a very, very difficult story for the McLaren team, who have had their ups and downs throughout the turbo hybrid era. You know, it must be said. That win in 2012 in Brazil seems so long ago. So it's amazing to see it all come together. And there's so many great people at McLaren. And I'm not just saying this for the benefit of saying this. I really genuinely believe this, that McLaren have all the tools in place to become a real force in Formula One again, as they often were in the 90s and the early 2000s. It was really something to behold. One thing I did enjoy was Daniel Ricciardo saying on the podium that the only sour note is that we haven't got a Ferrari up there with us, because they obviously want Ferrari to be up there with them. And, you know, we always talk about rivalries in the sport and how, you know, teams, there's always a perception that teams hate each other. The reality is they don't. You know, they travel together. They really do work well together. There's a huge bond with everybody in the paddock. And McLaren obviously recognise the struggles that Ferrari have gone through, similar to their own, and obviously trying to work their way up. And these two teams have been going hammer and tongs at each other as much as Red Bull and Mercedes have, almost more in some cases. It's just nice. It would have been lovely if they would have shared a moment like that together. But to be honest, it was all about McLaren, even though it was Ferrari's home circuit. And Ferrari did relatively well, all things considered. If you took their day and just, judged them on that, that would have been fine. But it's because McLaren did so well that obviously it's made it to look worse than it actually was. But it's nice to see moments. It's very wholesome stuff. And we got that last year with Pierre Gasly, how wholesome that was for him. And McLaren were very strong on that day as well. Almost got a double podium then. So, no, fantastic day for McLaren. Really, really happy for them. Really happy for Ricciardo, of course. And hopefully, who knows? It could be the start of something very special for them going forward.
I've always said that, though. Next season, watch out for McLaren and Ferrari. I'm going to remember this episode because I lost out on the clip last time. I lost the clip. So I've been saying it regularly. Watch out for McLaren and Ferrari in 2022. They're doing bits, mate. Trust me.
I mean, does it count as a clip if you say the same thing over and over and over again? Because there's loads of episodes that people could pull that out from, and I'm not disputing it. Right. I think it's fine, but
I just one of them. That's why I'm saying it. So it's just on record.
You can make a collage out of it or an album of some sort. But anyway, look. Now we've put this off long enough. Let's get into the topic of discussion, the part that our viewers and followers would have clicked on this and downloaded this to actually find out, and what we thought of the incident between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Now, I do want to open this up a little bit for debate, but obviously I want to keep this to a time limit. So, good Courtney, idea. I know you are very much, how can I put this, emotionally invested in what happened yesterday. Based on what you told me yesterday, and you've had a night to process everything, perhaps see more data, see more opinions from other people on this subject, where's your head at with what happened and how it went down?
Okay, so yesterday I was particularly emotionally invested because obviously he's my favourite driver, but I do not want to be seeing a tyre sitting on a driver's head. I don't want to be seeing it. I don't care who it is, even if that was Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. If that was Mazepin on the bottom there, I would not want to be seeing a tyre sitting on his helmet. So for me, that did add to how I was feeling. But upon reflection, I do think that the penalty given to Max was the ideal outcome because, both of them had their part to play in it, where Lewis could have just given him a little bit more space on the outside on the second part of the chicane. But I think most drivers in Max's position will have gone into the escape road and had a little whinge on a radio. The way Lewis did on the first lap, Max got his elbows out. Lewis wasn't ahead at the time, so Lewis took for the escape road. Max didn't do that because he's Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen never backs down. The other guy has to back down or they're going to crash. Now, this is an issue we've seen with other drivers in the past. Be it one of my favourite of all time, Senna, where it was always that other driver that had to compromise or there'd be a crash. Now, there's been a few incidents already this season where Lewis has backed out thinking about the championship game, but it's getting to the point now where it's happening way too often. So now Lewis is thinking, you know what? I'm not going to back down every time because Max has the upper ground here. Max needs to understand that if you're going to do it to me, we're going to crash as well. And this is what we're starting to see. And despite the penalty, we know it's going to continue. But what's going to happen is somebody gets seriously hurt from this. I love the rivalry. It's been a great season. You want to be seeing the best coming up against the best. But it's getting a little bit too naughty now. And I think with Max, this is just my opinion. I think he needs to be managed better. I think there are too many people. This is my opinion. I think there are too many people that blow smoke up his arse, and he isn't getting told when he's in the wrong. And I think this is a problem. Max will be a multiple world champion. The guy is absolutely amazing. It would have surprised me if he wanted to break Lewis's record. This is how good this guy is. But he's still getting let down by this mindset that he has that the other guy has to move or we're going to crash. And I blame his management for it.
So In regards to his management, anyone in particular, obviously not to get you to single people out, but do you feel that there are characters in and around Max's inner circle that you feel could perhaps have a more positive impact on his actions as a driver?
I look at Christian Horner in particular. It's not even during not even with Verstappen. I saw it with an extent to with Sebastian Vettel. In my opinion, I think Sebastian Vettel become a better human being when he left Red Bull. I just think at Red Bull they have this thing where they put somebody on a pedestal and they just don't let them. They just let them believe that they're faultless, and if something happens, it's always the other person's fault. We saw it with Vettel, and now we're seeing it with Max, and we've seen the rhetoric between Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, and we saw what happened at Silverstone. You know what? Yeah, it was a terrible incident. Lewis got punished for it, but that was calling for Lewis to get race ban and getting Alex Albon to. You know what happened with Alex Albon, and that's just not. And that kind of behaviour isn't giving the Max. Look, Max is a grown man; he can make his own opinions, but that's not giving Max a mindset. Oh, you know what? I could have had my part to blame in that. And I just feel that these people are actually letting Max down to an extent, because if Max was to work on his racecraft when it comes to Jordan with other drivers, he will be picking up these accolades even sooner than we would expect him to.
There's certainly a lot to think about. I mean, for me, this is a hard one. See, when I first saw it, I thought racing incident straight away. I have seen this replay of this incident probably about 100 times now, literally, because I want to be open-minded in this to try and make sure that my immediate reaction, if I was right or if there is definitely scope to see it from the perspective of the Hamilton's perspective, Max's perspective, and ultimately the perspective of the stewards who made the decision. I still maintain that the racer in me, and this doesn't hold much merit compared to those guys, but as a racer who has had experience in racing as well, I just feel that there is definitely an portion of blame on both parties. There is no one innocent party in all of this. In the same way that it was the same in Silverstone, there's not an innocent party in this.
Yeah, the second part of the turn, Lewis could have given him a little bit more space. I agree with that part.
Yeah. For me, I think that I can understand why the logic behind why the stewards gave Max a free place grid penalty. And ultimately, that penalty, that level of penalty, is not the same as what Lewis got with 10 seconds. I think that is basically the softest penalty that they could have given Max Verstappen, i.e. they felt Max was a bit more to blame, and Michael Massey mentioned predominantly to blame. And this is significant. I'm not a fan of them saying that one driver is predominantly to blame when there's two drivers at fault in different proportions for what happened. To me, that's just they thought Max was a little bit more to blame than Lewis, so they've given Max the penalty and thought, well, that's fine, because they probably knew that Red Bull were going to probably use this in Sochi to take the engine penalties anyway to mitigate that. And both drivers crashed out of the race. So it's not like one driver got the benefit. It's not like what happened at Silverstone where Lewis was able to carry on, serve his penalty and then win the race. Ultimately, you can't judge the penalty based on what had happened afterwards. That's just a testament to Lewis and Mercedes to win that race. But in this case, it was a lot more easier. For me, the part of it that I felt was a bit difficult to understand from the steward's perspective was that it felt like they were judging the incident based on turn 1 and turn 2 as one compounded incident rather than the incident happening at turn 2. So because of that, I don't agree with their logic and how they came to the decision that they did. And I'll explain why. And this isn't me saying, Max Verstappen's not at fault. Of course he is, in terms of his part of the incident. But, Lewis come out of the pits. He was obviously not going at the same speed as Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen was coming down the back straight at full speed, and Lewis obviously was coming from a shorter distance because he was coming out of the pits. The moment Lewis goes past the white line to rejoin the circuit, he goes left to defend against Verstappen. Now, he's entitled to do that as long as he doesn't force Max off the road. Max did have to take a little bit of his car, had to go onto the green AstroTurf part on the outside under braking into turn 1. Max did carry more speed, going round the outside of Lewis into turn one. Perhaps a bit more speed than probably he should have. But according to Article 27.3, and this is me really getting nerdy now, of the sporting regulations, and I'm quoting this for a reason because I want to make this point, right? I'm not just doing it to be a clever dick, but in the sporting regulations, Article 27.3 explains that the drivers must make every reasonable effort to use the track at all times, right? Now, I'm reading that for a reason because I don't want to misquote that because that is how it's written. And the reason why I bring that up is because I believe Max is making every reasonable attempt to stay on the track. And ultimately he does. Yes, he could take the escape road. But I don't accept the argument from a few pundits and some fans, etc., that Max has to take the escape road because it's the only option available to him. The fact that he was able to stay on the road without making contact with Lewis to start with suggests that he should be given what the FIA quoted as racing room to try and attempt turn two. Now, to go a bit further, not to try and, bore people too much on this one to the point where they don't care, but that alone, I believe Max should not have to take the escape road. He could have done if he wanted to avoid the incident, but I don't think there's a guide to say the only reason this accident happened is because Max didn't take the escape road. So that gets to the second part. Now, but going into turn one, Lewis is ahead, but Max is a long way alongside him. He's not ahead of Lewis or level with him, but he's very close to that. It's when we get to turn two, because Lewis is on the inside, he's got a bit more of a margin between the two, but Max is still there. And this is where I feel that Max, when he says that Lewis squeezed him a little bit or could have given him more room, there is some logic to this. But ultimately, because of what's happened at that point where Lewis has gone in, perhaps he could have given him more room, probably could have done, but he didn't. It then tightens up. Then Max goes over the sausage curb and then that causes the collision. Long story short, guys, in hindsight, as I pointed out there, I think Max had every right to be in the position he was in, but I also feel that Lewis had every right to be in a position he should have been in. Ultimately, neither of them gave the other one enough to avoid the accident. And, I do want to bring this up. The sausage curb is an issue in this. I think if there's no sausage curb there at all, they both make the corner, or at the very least, there's contact, but they'll still carry on. And the FIA deemed that Max was responsible for the contact more than Lewis. I can accept that, but I still think it was a racing incident. So, those are my 2 cents on it. That's kind of the complicated, lengthy explanation on this one. And again, apologies if you're tuning in and you're wondering why Adam sounds like he's got a bad cold, because he does.
You was getting emotional, weren't you?
Yeah, it's a very, very emotional moment. So that's kind of how I see it. I'm not laying blame on Lewis for not giving Max enough room. I'm not laying blame on Max for staying on the circuit when he should have cut. I think they both had their right to do what they wanted to do. But ultimately what happened was you had two drivers that weren't prepared to give each other any more space than they thought they could avoid, and they've come together. I mean, we saw a similar incident between Hamilton and Raikkonen a couple of years ago at Monza, and Hamilton was on the outside, and Kimi actually gave Lewis a lot more room than Lewis did for Max. And they both made it through. Lewis ultimately got the position, but in this case, we can compare incidents all we want to, but obviously that's not going to get us anywhere. What I want to mention, Courtney, because we've mentioned a lot on this already, and I want to try and bring this forward now that we've both said our pieces on this. Mm-hmm. Is there a bigger issue here where we've got two drivers right now, and as I said already, Max has a history of being an uncompromising driver. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're in positions where sometimes you have to concede a little bit to see the bigger picture, Max doesn't do that very often. Hardly at all. Lewis used to do that in the right moments to avoid a clash. Now he's not doing that. Ever since Silverstone, he's stopped doing that to the point where we saw this coming. We thought they were going to collide, and at the first opportunity, they did. Is there a fear now that unless the FIA or the stewards step in and try to say to these two, look guys, I know you're fighting for a championship, but you have to be more considerate to each other in racing, we could see this happen on a more regular basis?
So that's the thing, right? So Imola, Spain, and then now you've got the start to this race. You had the position there where Lewis compromised. There have been examples of where Lewis has compromised. So I think I'm going to reference the interview that Max took part in afterwards, where he quoted, "It takes both drivers to be on board for these kind of moves to work." Okay, Max, that includes you, because there have been various examples this season where Lewis has compromised and Max has benefited from Lewis's compromises. When has Max compromised? We haven't seen this yet. So I don't think Max is actually in a position to make statements like that until he does it himself. And that's where I go back to my original point. Yeah, I said in a slightly emotive fashion, this is where Max's management comes into it, because Lewis was guilty of this in the early stages of his career, and he's obviously had some frank words from certain people in his life that said to him, "Look, you can be a much better driver if you compromise in these kind of positions." And Max needs the right people around him to take him to that next level. But to go off on a slight tangent, there's been this whole hype about Emma I can't say her name properly, winning the tennis, winning the US Open. And, I've been listening to TalkSport, and a lot of people have been made a good point. She could go on to win so many more Grand Slams if she's surrounded by the right people. And the same applies to Max. Max could be one of the, if not the best drivers of all time. But I just feel right now, there are certain people around him that aren't giving him the constructive criticism when he needs it. That constructive criticism is going to make him a much better driver, because the guy already has the speed. If he has to work on that racecraft, it's going to be difficult to stop. And I just think there are people around him that need to have that conversation with him to improve him as a driver.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. You're absolutely right. When Max says both drivers need to comply in these situations, or so to speak, he's right, but he has to be one of those two drivers. He can't expect someone else to do it for him, because you end up in a bit of a prisoner's dilemma, where there's an expectation on both sides that the other one is going to give way to them, but knowing that would make them think, well, I don't have to, so I'll always win. But if both of them think like that, as we've seen ultimately, you end up with both of them in the gravel, or one car on top of another. By the way, a lot of people that are probably angry by that, and I was very much concerned for Lewis's safety, and the Halo did a fantastic job. I think we should not forget that it was a very scary moment, and the Halo did its job. If it wasn't there, who knows what could have happened? You don't want to think about it. But this is why I mentioned the sausage curb, and I feel like the FI and the stewards really need to look at getting rid of those in certain areas, because it's not the first time we've had a big accident in Monza. I remember there was an F3 race a couple of years ago at the end of Parabolica. There was a sausage curb there, and it sent a car flying up into the barriers, and it was really scary. And they've got rid of it since.
I don't know why they have them there.
No, but ultimately that is what causes that the Red Bull to topple over the Mercedes. If it's not there, they might collide, but there's no way, unless they bounce on each other's tyres and it sends Max up like that, it's not going to happen. So I think they really do need to look at them sausage curbs a bit more. I'm surprised more people aren't talking about this. Maybe it's because they're distracted by what happened between them two, and they've ignored the fact that ultimately that is what caused Max to mount Lewis's car quite literally.
And that's where this slight argument comes in, though, why Max should have taken to the escape road, given the circumstances, because they do go through these safety briefings. They know where those bollards are. And that's why, it's so easy just to say it as a guy talking through a phone. But, in these split moments, these are the kind of moments that define a champion.
Yeah,
I do think he should have taken to the escape road, only because there was a sausage curb there. Let me stress that. Because if there wasn't a sausage curb there, stick with it. But because there was a sausage curb there, you've gone, oh shit, that's there. I'm going to go onto the escape road and have a whinge on the radio.
Yeah, no, there is some truth to that. I think the only rebuttal I would offer, and this is what I think Max Verstappen would probably say, is that the only reason why he was in that position is because Lewis forced him unnecessarily wide into turn one. And he could have given Max a bit more room going there. That's my opinion on that, because I feel like the only reason Max is where he is because he's had to go very wide into turn one because of where Lewis has forced him. Now, of course, I don't think you should really set that kind of precedent where it encourages drivers to force someone as wide as they possibly can so that they've got no choice. I mean, admittedly, on lap one, Max and Lewis went together at turn 4, and they went in quite quickly, and of course Lewis backed out of it. But then I will argue that I think Lewis would have gone wide in that corner anyway, because he was going pretty quickly, and he was hoping Max was not going to match him, and then Max did to cover the inside, and the two of them had a little bit of contact, and Lewis went wide. You know, make that what you will. I wouldn't use that to compare to the other incident because I don't think you can. There's two separate incidents and separate situations in the race, etc., stuff that we've seen so many times before. But there's always going to be... I just feel in that situation, you're absolutely right to point out that if Max had done what he did, they would have avoided the incident easily. And I think that's what the expectation of the FIA was on the stewards. They said that themselves, but I just think that contradicts some of the stuff that they've already mentioned in terms of hard, fair racing. I really do. But look, I think ultimately what we need is a situation where the two of them can come together and, if it's possible, just between the two of them agree that we need to give each other a little bit more space or a bit more consideration in these incidents. But when they're happening so quickly, your split-second judgments are ultimately what determines the outcome of an incident. And I just don't see it changing. I certainly hope we don't end up with a situation where we have a Red Bull mounting a Mercedes or vice versa in the way that we did at Monza. Nobody wants to see that, and it's brilliant we had the halo to protect Lewis in that situation. But I just feel that these two... I would be very surprised if these two don't come together again before the end of the season. So something's got to give. I'm in no position to say who should do what. I don't think either of them should feel obligated to do it. But I think they both have to understand that they're going to have to be a bit more respectful towards each other in order to, these two to race hard and fair for how they did for most of the part of the season before Silverstone.
Well, yeah, because it's tarnishing what has been a good championship. Yeah, you know what? Lewis has had a little bit of luck with the incidents in Silverstone and Hungary. I think Max and Red Bull have been better. But overall, we've had a good championship. And there is a healthy respect between the two drivers. There is, despite some of the body language from Max after the crash, there is a respect between the two drivers for their abilities. And that's why they're letting themselves down with how they're conducting themselves with these kind of moves.
Yeah. But what that means ultimately is the stewards have determined that Max Verstappen will be given a free-place grid penalty for Sochi, the Russian Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. But I think you and I, Courtney, and a lot of people probably feel that Red Bull are going to use that race as the best opportunity to put the new power units into Max's car and everything else. So he'll probably start at the back and try and make his way through the field. And it's a track where you can overtake pretty easily. And the Red Bulls should be very, very strong. So even if Hamilton or Bottas, whoever it is at Mercedes, goes on to win that race, Red Bull probably think they might be able to get on a podium from the back. It's certainly possible. Which brings us nicely to the next drivers I want to talk about in Bottas and Perez. And I've got to say, Daniel Ricciardo, definitely the star of the weekend, and Lando Norris up there as well. But Valtteri Bottas has to be mentioned as one of the other stars of the weekend. I mean, it's amazing what can happen for a driver's confidence when you've got your future secured and you're not worrying about where you're going to be driving next season. And I think for the first time in a long time, we saw the best Valtteri Bottas. I mean, Bottas has always operated at a very high level in most cases, but he was stellar this weekend. He was untouchable in qualifying, equally untouchable in the sprint race. Max was always kept at bay quite easily. And he worked his way all the way through the back of the field on pace and got himself onto the podium from the very back of the grid. I mean, I don't care who you are. That is an incredible job. What did you make of Bottas this weekend?
Yeah, I think you put it nicely there. He's behaving like a guy that's had the shackles taken off him. The circumstances, he earned the qualifying. He benefited from Lewis's poor start. But it would have been out of order on him anyway, because we know he'll have been asked to move over for Lewis for the extra points and obviously starting at the front. So in a way, he benefited from Lewis's bad start. But you know what? For Valtteri, that's a great thing because he earned the first place for the sprint and he put in a solid performance. Unfortunately, he had to go to the back. But, one of the criticisms I've had for Valtteri is that, struggling to overtake. But he's one of the best overtakers on the race itself. So he'd be very happy with that performance. And you're right, I just think he has that pressure off him now. And, he will have a little bit of a fuck you mentality as well. But I think putting those both things together, I think it's only going to benefit Mercedes in this Constructors' Championship. I think at this point, I have a feeling that Max is going to win the Drivers' Championship. But I think this newfound form from Valtteri could well win Mercedes a Constructors' Championship.
It could do. He's certainly driving at the moment like someone who, you know, he knows his situation for next season. He knows what he's got to do for the rest of this one. And he's very much playing his part now. And to be fair to Valtteri, he has been for most of this season. Ultimately, his goal this season for Mercedes has been be better than Red Bull's number 2 driver. And on the occasion, disrupt Verstappen. The latter one, up for debate, probably not been able to do much about that, but he's certainly been more solid for Mercedes than Perez has for Red Bull, respectively. And speaking of Perez as well, you know, again, I think we have to judge this as a bit of a mixed bag for Perez because qualifying wasn't great. He managed to get himself into 9th in the sprint, which ultimately wasn't worth any points, but it was a better qualifying position for the main race. And then he got himself all the way up into P3 and then let himself down by getting a stupid 5-second penalty for a very similar incident that he avoided in the sprint as well after what happened with Charles Leclerc. I mean, Perez said that Leclerc forced him off and, you know, he had no choice and he decided to keep the position. He thought it was unfair to have to give it back. I mean, how do you feel about that one, Courtney? Do you think Perez should have just let Leclerc go, or do you think he was a bit stupid, knowing that he probably could have got the Ferrari anyway and ended up getting that P3?
Yeah, I think it's a case of a little bit of red mist from Perez, and it's cost him slightly. I mean, it could have been worse for him. I mean, he still finished in a relatively decent position, even with the penalty. But I think you're right. He definitely had a mixed weekend. It's probably an average weekend for Perez. He's just not quite there. I do question the lack of development on his car. I do feel the majority of the resources are going on Max's car, and we're not really seeing the best of what Perez has to offer, which is a shame. I think next season's going to be a massive one for him because you can see pressure building on that second seat of Red Bull. I just hope that Red Bull give him the tools and the toys that he needs in order to prove himself.
Yeah, very true. I mean, I've heard this a lot. A lot of people saying that Perez's car has not been developed anywhere near as much as Verstappen's is. And it makes me wonder, well, first of all, why would you do that? I mean, I can understand giving Max all the resources possible to win this championship, but if Red Bull really, really want to help Max Verstappen, they need to give him a number 2 driver or a car with that number 2 driver in. Cap. Quite possibly. I mean, maybe, but I find it very strange that they put all their eggs in just the one basket to try and win the Constructors. I mean, yes, Red Bull want Max to win the Drivers' Championship, but if that is true, they need to do more to give Perez a more of a fighting chance to get in those positions. I mean, there could be some truth to it. I really do think that could be possible. I mean, I've never seen anything official to say to me that Perez is not getting anywhere near as much as Max is in terms of the upgrades on his car, but the deficit between them on out-and-out pace is quite shocking. So there could be some element of truth to that. I'm not sure. Either way, you know...
Love to know, though. I'd love to know.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot. A lot of people keep saying it, and I've never been forwarded any sources or seen any news or any technical experts to agreeing with this theory. They've all come to the conclusion, like we have, that Perez has been underperforming in qualifying. And ultimately that is what's putting him so far down the order, and he's always having to play catch-up. I mean, even if Red Bull aren't developing that car, it should still be faster in his hands than the Ferraris at most circuits or the McLarens or the Alfa Tauris. You know, he shouldn't be embedded in the midfield and struggling to get through. So Perez does need to do more. It's weekends like this where ultimately the Constructors' Championship is going to be decided, where we saw Valtteri put in a stellar performance this weekend, got on a podium after starting dead last, and then you got Perez, who started a bit further ahead of him and finished behind him because of his own mistakes. It's that sort of thing that will cost Perez and will put more pressure on him next season if Red Bull don't win the Constructors' Championship for him to keep his seat for the next season. So we'll have to wait and see what Perez does. I mean, he did look better this weekend, but again, a few little mistakes, and it's cost him some championship points and also some bragging rights. I mean, I'm sure Bottas is his target, and he wouldn't have enjoyed being beat by Valtteri, despite the fact Valtteri started at the back of the field, even if he had a faster car. Look, above all else, Mercedes have made ground on Red Bull. This was a track where they expected to be very, very strong. Ultimately, it didn't work out from the way that they would have wanted for the Drivers' Championship. But there's still plenty of action to go. Would you say this weekend, if we judge it solely on Mercedes and Red Bull, how both teams would have seen their weekends possibly going, do you think Red Bull would be the happier of the two, or do you think Mercedes would be happier out of the two?
I think Red Bull will be, because it's something else we discussed. We're a bit obsessed with development. It does look like Red Bull still developing Max's car, and it doesn't look like Mercedes are putting much. We discussed this a few weeks ago where, we feel that Mercedes are more focused on 2022 and Red Bull really want this one. I just feel that these new developments on the Red Bull are going to give Max the. I think, as I said, I think Max is going to win the drivers' championship, but I think Mercedes are going to win the constructors mainly because of Valtteri's performance. Valtteri's performing better than Perez. As simple as that. So I think that's how it's going to play out.
Well, I think Valtteri's a better driver than Sergio Perez. I think Valtteri Bottas is still one of the best drivers in Formula One. I just think that a lot of people have kind of overlooked that because of how comprehensively beaten he is by Lewis Hamilton on a regular basis. And I think, it's that thing with Lewis that people seem to forget how good he is or what he's achieved, almost to the point where you kind of give caveats to his opponents thinking that he's getting beat, like Bottas is getting beat by a complete nobody, when the reality is he's getting beaten by the greatest driver of all time statistically. So, yeah, it's a very strange one with Valtteri. I think people are probably going to appreciate his real value after he's left Mercedes, and hopefully he can bring that to Alfa Romeo next season going forward. We'll have to wait and see. Incidentally, I almost forgot to mention, Courtney, I ran a poll on the DNF1 page on the Verstappen-Hamilton incident and asked our followers to basically vote for how they saw it, and surprisingly, 56% ruled that it was a racing incident, which was quite a shock. I was very much expecting one of the drivers to have the lion's share of the votes, but no, and just for obviously the benefit of filling out the rest of them, 26% felt it was Verstappen's fault, and then 18% thought it was Lewis's fault. So probably if I was
that's a pretty accurate representation of where I feel people stand on it, though. I think
that's about where I stand on it, to be honest, in terms of if you're going to portion blame in the incidents, like, you go, Max can have 30, Lewis can have 20 and 50 for a racing. There you go, everyone's happy. But yeah, it's quite interesting to see how our followers think. Incidentally, guys, of course, if you want to comment in on your opinions, I do want to ask you to please keep it respectable. Please do not slander either of the two drivers. Even if you don't like them and you want to give an honest opinion, that's absolutely more than welcomed, and love that, and we're happy to discuss with you. But I will not accept anybody going and saying, oh, Lewis is this or Max is this and everything else, like, to slander them. Like, let's keep this respectful, because we're talking about two very competitive drivers in a big incident. And the most important thing is everyone got away okay. That's the most important thing. And we want to keep it that way going forward. Before we get into the 5-star reviews, if you like, or the star reviews as we like to call them, I want to talk a little bit about Ferrari just briefly.
Oh, you have to. It's around Grand Prix.
Yeah, absolutely. Home Grand Prix. P4 for Charles Leclerc, I think it was, and what was it, P6 for Sainz? Very nearly got P5 Sainz, but he just wasn't close enough to Perez to get the benefit of that 5-second penalty. If you were to deconstruct Ferrari's weekend, do you feel that they'd be happy with their performance, or do you feel that it's going to be overshadowed by the fact that McLaren ended up getting first and second?
Yeah, spot on. I think if McLaren hadn't won that race, they'd have been extremely happy. So if you're just looking at their own performance, they will be happy with it, because they expected to really struggle. God, if you look at where they were last season compared to how they were for this year's Grand Prix, they've come along leaps and bounds in that regard. You could use that as a blueprint of how far Ferrari have come in the last year. So I think they will be happy. They'll just be a bit gutted that McLaren have done as well as they have. And I think they'll be cautiously optimistic for the rest of the season, even though McLaren won.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, when I was watching, I was quite happy with what Ferrari are doing, and I thought it was going to be a difficult weekend for them. Monza usually is for Ferrari. Surprisingly, their home circuit, it's always, this is a track that they've had more success at than any other team. Ferrari have won more races at that circuit than any team has won anywhere else. So, it's a circuit where the Tifosi expect, and even though they were there in a limited number compared to what we would like to see, owing still to the COVID pandemic, I think you kind of got to take stock and say it was a good weekend for Ferrari. I think they did the best job they possibly could, both drivers. Fourth and sixth, the way things have been going this season, they'd have very much taken that at any circuit. And they were unlucky not to get a podium. Charles Leclerc was very unlucky. I think if those rumoured upgrades Ferrari were going to get on their engine, if they had them this weekend, there's a very good chance that Ferrari may have been on the podium, maybe more. Charles Leclerc said this weekend was one of his best performances in his career. He said that quite a lot this season, but to be fair, I think this has been his most solid season so far as a driver. Far from perfect, but I think he's been very good. Carlos Sainz did very well to recover after that crash in FP2, I believe it was. We had a nasty crash coming out of Ascari. He managed to recover from that and still get a P6. Could have been more, but, I'm a bit nitpicking, really, under the circumstances. So, I think they'll lick their wounds on this one, be happy for McLaren, and then hopefully try and claw that back. It's an exciting battle between those two teams. It really is. Ferrari have a fantastic weekend last weekend. McLaren go and have an incredible weekend this weekend. And who knows, Ferrari may find themselves on the podium or maybe more at Sochi. This is just how good things have been. Yeah, these two teams have been fantastic. They really have been. And hopefully that continues towards the end of the season between those two. Because it's a great battle.
Yeah, because this is the situation we're in now. Because you have Max against Lewis, and then usually you have Bottas and Perez. Generally, they tend to struggle. We know Valtteri's picked up his form. So if we have a situation where Lewis and Max hit each other again, there could be an opportunity for Ferrari. If McLaren can do it, Ferrari can too.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go to our reviews, I do want to mention one more team if I can. Alpha Tauri. What a terrible weekend for them. A weekend, obviously they're one of their home Grand Prix as well. Not their home Grand Prix, of course we had that at Imola. But, considering that we were here last year, Pierre Gasly, the romantic fairy tale story, getting his first win after the period he just, come back from at Red Bull, and obviously losing Antoine Hubert was obviously very, very terrible for him. He had such a great weekend. But this weekend, despite his best efforts, it went horribly wrong for him. Wasn't able to start the race. Neither was Yuki Tsunoda, of course, for similar reasons. How do you pick the bones out of that one for AlphaTauri? It was a weekend that probably promised quite a lot for them, and it just never really happened for them. It really is a complete nightmare compared to what we saw 12 months ago.
It's a missed opportunity. Pierre Gasly could have got a good haul of points in this race. He was there or thereabouts, just behind the. If you have the likes of McLaren and Mercedes and Max Verstappen, he was there or thereabouts. When it comes to practice and qualifying. Unfortunately, these things happen. As brutal as it is, it happens to the best teams, and they just got hit hard this weekend.
Yeah,
they just have to lick their wounds and move on.
Yeah, very much so. For Pierre Gasly, it was a difficult one for them. And of course, Pierre had such a great qualifying. Getting it, was it P4 or P5, something like that? And and then he got that front wing caught underneath him in the sprint, which took him completely out of contention as he crashed at Curva Grande. Very unfortunate. Fortunately, it was okay. It was a slow crash, but he was okay. And then, of course, in the main race, both him and Tsunoda weren't able to start. It was an absolute nightmare for them. So they'll come back stronger, but they really could have done with trying to get more for them than they actually did. It was just really unfortunate. Let's talk about the reviews now. Obviously, we did this before the Dutch Grand Prix, guys. We're trying this now where Courtney and I give reviews out of 5 stars. Obviously, 5 stars being the highest and half a star being the lowest. We're not going to give anybody 0 stars, although I'm probably sure there's 1 or 2 candidates that could be worthy of that this weekend. But let's run through this one to round off this episode, Courtney. So let's start with our race winners, McLaren. Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, P1 and P2. And of course, we should include sprint results and qualifying performances as well, as this is a sprint weekend. So, Courtney, I'm pretty certain I know what we're going to go for, but Danny, Rick, and Lando Norris, out of 5 stars, what are you going to give them?
5 stars to Danny, Rick, 4.5 for Lando.
Ooh. Can I ask why 4.5 stars for Lando? Because I want to give them both 5 stars each, to be honest.
I think Lando did have an opportunity to be a bit higher up in qualifying, and he missed the opportunity, and that's the only reason why I'm not going to give him the 5 stars.
No, fair enough. I'm going to give him 5 stars because obviously Danny Ric was phenomenal this weekend, by far the best driver and deserved winner. And Lando Norris, yes, qualifying, he could have been a little bit better, but he recovered that in the sprint. He got a great start, get ahead of Lewis Hamilton and held him up very, very nicely in P3. And then, of course, got to P2 on merit. Of course, we should say that he managed to get ahead of Lewis and Max owing to their slow pit stops. But, of course, he took advantage of that. And he was brilliant to play the team game. He very much could have been tempted to go for the win. I remember one Sebastian Vettel not playing in the team game at the Malaysian Grand Prix, was it 2012, something like that, or 2013, one of the two, and the old multi-21 incident with Mark Webber. So that's an example of where it didn't go wrong. They obviously finished 1 and 2, but it's an example of where something like that can be really risky. Give everyone a heart palpitation and etc. in the garage watching them two fighting out when they've got 1 and 2 almost guaranteed. But no, I'm going to give Lando a 5-star. He played the team game brilliantly well, and a P2 only to his teammate. I don't think McLaren could have asked much more than what they got. So yeah, 5 stars for those guys. Let's go to Red Bull, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez.
I'm going to give them both 3 because up until Max's crash, he did actually have a solid weekend. And I just think, given the incident, I'm going to knock down a couple of low stars.
Yeah. Qualifying was good for Max. Very nearly got it on pole. Even though we thought that Mercedes were going to be very, very strong. Ultimately, they were with Bottas with that fresh engine. Sprint race, he managed to stay ahead of Hamilton. So it was good. I'm going to give Max 2.5. Ultimately, because despite everything that I've argued to saying that, it was not 50-50, but both drivers had a part to play in it. In hindsight, if Max did concede to Lewis on that occasion, and you're right, he lost a few points to Lewis, he still gets more points. Ultimately, the championship situation is going to be better for him as a result of this, and that's not me implying a tactical foul, as Damon Hill referred to it to the Sky F1 pundit, and I thought that was a bit inappropriate for him to say that, because it's, that I'm not a fan of, unless it's obvious that they deliberately did. I mean, the example of a tactical foul, if you like, in F1 is what Schumacher did to him in Adelaide 94. Yeah. But also Senna Prost in 1990, and also Damon Hill when he took out Michael at the British Grand Prix in 1995, when he was never going to pass Michael, he just went straight on. That would be what I'd consider to be a tactical foul. What happened with Max and Lewis? No. I think Toto said it in jest, but I don't think Toto really meant that. But then everyone starts quoting it as if Toto was trying to have a dig at Max, which I thought, hold on, no, he wasn't doing that. He actually said he thought it was a racing incident. If anything, it was what Red Bull was saying, Christian Horner and Max Verstappen afterwards, where they probably thought, actually, we might have messed up a bit here. And I think Andrei Shovlin at Mercedes actually doubled down on that. He actually felt that their body language, compared to what they did at Silverstone, where they were literally going for Lewis, probably suggested that they felt that they probably were in the wrong this time around. So, it's always interesting to pick up on that. But no, I'm going to give Max 2.5 stars because, that kind of crash. The pit stop wasn't his fault, but ultimately he's come away with no points, or 1 point, if you like, or was it 1 point? Yeah, from 2 points from the sprint, sorry. So he does increase his lead, but yeah, 2.5 stars for Max. Perez, I'll give him a 3.5 stars because Perez could have got on a podium, and I think that would have been a solid performance under the circumstances, but that silly mistake, not letting Charles Leclerc have the place back. And he did the same thing in the sprint race as well, although he did let the place back. So just those little mistakes cost Perez, and he could have got a bit more. And ultimately losing out to Bottas and Mercedes is a big feeling as well. Mercedes, Hamilton and Bottas.
I'm going to give Valtteri, I'm going to give Valtteri 5. I'm going to give Valtteri 5, given the circumstances. He had a flawless weekend. Lewis, I'm actually going to give him 2.5 because there was a lot of promise going into this weekend. Messed up the start in the sprint race, and then obviously you had the incident with Max. Bit of a scruffy weekend for his own standards. So yeah, I'm going to give him 2.5. I'm
going to be probably a bit harsher on Lewis, and I'll explain why now. I know it's easy to think that you just give him the same rating as Max Verstappen because of what happened in the main race, but because of the reasons you've already mentioned in the sprint and also in qualifying where he underperformed, I'm going to give him 1.5 stars. I think this has been one of Lewis's worst weekends. And look, I know I've been quite critical of Lewis in recent weeks, owing that he needs to improve on certain things. But I say that with the utmost respect for him in the fact that this season he has come up against a formidable opponent in Verstappen. And by comparison, other than the first 4 races of the season, his level was not being where it should be, because the first 4 races he was phenomenal. After that, not so good. By comparison, obviously, Red Bull have had a better car competitively over most of those races, but the mistakes that Lewis has made, I've expected better from him in that regard. And I think on a weekend like we saw, he made another mistake with a poor start. Qualifying, obviously, he didn't get it on pole. We expected him to do that because we're so used to Lewis doing that. So it was a bit of a surprise that he didn't. Maybe the fresh engine Bottas had gave him a sizable advantage. We'll never know. But then, of course, his part in the incident with Max. And ultimately, as you said, Courtney, with Lewis Hamilton, this weekend was a weekend that he would have targeted to try and get back ahead of Max in the championship. I can't think of many more weekends. Maybe Sochi, because of the nature of Verstappen's penalty, they may put him at the back with the new engine. But this was really a weekend that Lewis needed to, lay down a marker or put some damage to Red Bull and Verstappen. And he's come away this weekend 2 points worse off against Max than he was going in. So,
agreed.
As unfortunate as it was, the incident with Max, I've got to say it was not a good weekend for Lewis anyway. Even if Lewis had finished just ahead of Max, that would have been about an average weekend for him anyway, because it could have been so much more. It really could have been. So, 1.5 for Lewis. And 5 stars for Valtteri. Superb weekend for him. On pole position, won the sprint quite convincingly, and, got a podium. And to be honest, if he didn't have to take those engine penalties, he probably could have won as well. So, and I'm pretty certain if Lewis was there, he would have given Lewis the benefit of the advantage and let him through, but he didn't have to because Lewis wasn't there. So, no, brilliant stuff from Valtteri. Ferrari, Leclerc and Sainz.
Gonna give Leclerc 4.5, and I'm gonna give Sainz 4.
Yeah, I would say that right. I'll give them both 4.5. Because I think Sainz was very unlucky not to get P5. But I think considering the way his weekend went, he was, his accident, I think he drove pretty well. So I think, good weekends for both of them. It's just unfortunately been sullied because of how good McLaren were. So good performances from them. Who's next? Let's do the easy one. Let's do Alpha Tauri. Since, what can we say? I'm just going to keep it easy. I'm just going to say, I don't think we can we really judge them?
We could.
Well, Gasly qualified brilliantly, didn't he?
Yeah, that's the thing. With qualifying, I think you have to give PS some credit for what he did in qualifying. But Yuki Tsunoda did absolutely nothing, really.
No, he went out in Q1 because he got through to Q2 and then his lap time got deleted, which put George Russell back into Q2. So I'm going to give Gasly, based on his qualifying performance and how unfortunate he was, the benefit of the doubt. So I'll give him 3.5 stars. I think that's fair. Yuki, 2.5.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do a nice, easier one. Let's do Alpine, Ocon and Alonso. Alonso, P8 and Ocon, P10.
Gonna give Alonso 4, and I'm gonna give Ocon 3 because Ocon got involved with a few tangles, didn't he? So I'm gonna give Ocon 3.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. I think Alonso did a good job. The only reason I wouldn't score Alonso higher because ultimately he finished behind Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. So 4 stars for Fernando, 3.5 for Ocon. He had a good weekend, but as you said, he got caught up in a few tangles and was a bit naughty in a few places. So 3.5 in 4 for Fernando. Aston Martin, Stroll obviously finishing in P7. And Sebastian Vettel, he had a very difficult weekend. He was very much in the battles this weekend. Every time we went on board with Vettel, he was almost like having an incident with someone or someone was going into him. It was really weird, but ended up P12. So they've lost a bit more ground to Alpine, who very much seem to be running away with this 5th place at the moment. But they still gained some ground on AlphaTauri. So how would you rate their weekends?
I think, all things considered, give Lance Stroll 4 with the package that he has. It was a pretty solid result for him. And given everything that happened with Sebastian, I'll probably give him a 3.
Yeah. Seb's had better weekends and he's been quite solid of late. Stroll had a much better weekend. There was a bit of a strange moment between them two on the first lap where Stroll went very wide at one of the Lesmo corners?
But it bogged Sebastian Vettel down, didn't it?
Yeah, and even though they didn't make contact, I think it was a bit silly from Lance because whilst you're racing on the first lap is a bit hectic, I think when you know your teammate's there, you've got to try and give him a little bit more leeway and not try to force him out the way that he did. So it was quite dangerous. And in the end, you're both trying to fight for the Constructors' Championship. The last thing you want to be doing is compromising your teammate. But other than that, the performance from Stroll was very, very good on the day. And I think he deserves, I'd say 4 stars for Stroll and 3 for Seb. I think it was quite underwhelming this weekend, but he was very much in the wars today. Seemed to be having it, like Mick Schumacher as well, another one with him. So he's very unfortunate, Sebastian Vettel, but it's just one of those days, I suppose. It was nice. He had a nice little battle with Fernando Alonso. They were racing each other. And it's funny because when we saw them two battling early on, I think it was in the sprint, that they were having a nice little battle between each other in the first sector. It reminded me of all of the videos we've seen of them two going at it for Red Bull and Ferrari many, many years ago when they were racing at Curva Grande. And Seb was a little bit naughty on that occasion, didn't give Fernando the space, didn't leave him the space at all, and got a little penalty for that as well. But that was quite fun to see them two going at it. Who haven't we done? We haven't done Alfa Romeo. Giovinazzi, I mean, it's a tale of two kinds of weekends for him, isn't it? Because he was brilliant in qualifying, got into Q3, wasn't he P7 or P8, something like that?
He was high up. He did really well in qualifying.
Yeah, he was fantastic in qualifying. And then in the sprint race, he made a mistake sprint race. He made a mistake by coming across Carlos Sainz on the exit of La Roja chicane and then ended up damaging his front wing by going into the barrier. And I suppose with Giovinazzi, Courtney, now that his future's so uncertain and it looks likely at the moment that he may not be in a seat next year at Alfa Romeo, he's been driving phenomenally well. He did the same in Zandvoort. He got a brilliant qualifying performance and did well in the race. And it almost makes you think, if Antonio Giovinazzi drove every single race like his career was on the line, he would not have to worry about his career being on the line.
He's a bit of an enigma, isn't he? This speed's kind of come out of nowhere. But I still feel he's left it a bit too late. And for that reason, I am going to give both drivers 3 stars because I think Kubica has actually done a fairly solid job, given that he hasn't really been in a decent Formula 1 car for quite some time now. Yeah,
I'm going to give Robert Kubica 4.5 stars. I'm going to be very generous. I mean, Gio, I'll give him a 3.5 because his brilliant qualifying performance, but he let himself down in the sprint and in the race. Obviously, it was just compounded. But no, I'm going to give Kubica 4.5 stars. 1, because he didn't finish dead last. He finished ahead of Mick Schumacher in the Haas, although that might have been expected. 2, as you said, he's had very little running. So it does, and a sprint weekend as well, that's going to take it out of him very physically. I mean, we all know Robert, for obvious reasons, is not as physically able or as strong as the other drivers in that regard. So he has to sort of adapt with his injury to his left arm, I think it is. So, he's had to accommodate for that, and I think he did rather well. The other reason why I want to give Robert a high rating this weekend is by finishing in P14, he's now overtaken Nikita Mazepin in the Drivers' Championship because he's finished higher. So now officially, Nikita Mazepin is 21st in a 20-car championship. It's not really what you want to hear if you're a fan of Nikita Mazepin, but it happened to George Russell last year. When Kubica stepped in for Alfa Romeo, or something like that. So yeah, very, very strange one. But I think we ended up with 23 cars competing in the championship last year because we had Enzo Fittipaldi for Haas and we also had Jack Aitken for Williams as well. So quite busy there. But yeah, no, a strange day for Alfa Romeo. No points in the end for them, but some signs of promise, I suppose. And the good news, of course, Kimi is coming back for the Russian Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. He's confirmed that, so we're looking forward to seeing Kimi back for the rest of the season, hopefully, as he rounds out his F1 career. Williams. Almost forgot about Williams, eh? A really good weekend for them, actually. George Russell, P9. So, in the points, once again, George Russell. He's very much in the mood celebrating his new Mercedes contract, and he managed to get some points. And Nicholas Latifi in P11. Not too far from the points either. So, what ratings would you give those guys?
Yeah, I'm going to give George 4.5 for what he's done with the car. I think we're taking it for granted now. Williams getting points. They've done brilliant with the drivers. I'm going to give Latifi 4. I think Latifi's starting to step up. I think he's starting to finally get some recognition, some actual like Formula One stock, if that makes sense. And he's doing it at a very good time. I think if he keeps this up next season, he might find himself in a very stable position. He seems that he's really finally adapted to being in Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, Latifi's been a good asset for the Williams team this season, and he's certainly stepped up in the last couple of months. It's another one of those drivers that I think now that his future's secure, he's a bit more freer in what he wants to do, and he's driving better. And technically speaking, he managed to outqualify George Russell for the first time by finishing ahead of him in the sprint. So I don't know how that counts in terms of the statistics. I'm sure it must count. So George Russell's 50 race streak of beating a Williams teammate has now officially come to an end. So look, it depends on how you see it, but I mean, technically it counts. It's in the record book. So no, good job for Latifi. Didn't get any points, but is what it is. So no, good job for him. 4 stars. 4.5 for Russell, definitely. Points once again, 3 out of 4 races now he's got in the points. It just seems that George is now becoming a magnet to points. Now, it's like London buses. You don't get 1 for ages and then 2 come at once, or in this case, 3. So, no, good job for them. And then it rounds us off nicely to the final team in this ratings, and that's Haas and Mick Schumacher, P15. He had a difficult time in the sprint race. He was dead last in that, and had an incident with Seb Vettel at the start. But he managed to recover it, kept his nose clean, just about, and last of the confirmed runners, but P15 is never a bad thing. And then, of course, you've got Nikita Mazepin, who retired from the race, had a collision with Mick Schumacher where he spun him round and got a penalty. I mean, one thing I do want to mention with Haas is we've got 2 drivers right now, very inexperienced, but they always seem to be coming together and having these incidents. We had a few incidents this season. We've had one recently, the Dutch Grand Prix, that was quite dangerous. And both of them are just arguing back and forth, putting the onus on the other one to improve. I mean, Haas are in a bit of a predicament, Corny, because this year was meant to be a year about letting these 2 just drive and feel themselves into Formula One and learn and get more experience, so that when they have a more competitive car next season, so they hope, they'll be able to utilise it to the best that they can. But it just seems that right now that Haas are more preoccupied with keeping 2 hot-head inexperienced drivers from crashing into each other on a weekly basis and having to deal with a repair bill for any crashes that they do have.
That's the last thing you need when you've got one of the smallest budgets in Formula One. I'd say that Haas are probably my least favourite team at the moment, because you can look at every single team and go, they've got that going for them. That makes sense. They've got something they can really build on. Apart from Mick Schumacher to a degree, they don't really have a good environment there. We've discussed the other driver on many occasions, but that he's a bad egg. He's a bad egg, and no matter how much funding he brings, if you don't have a good harmony in any team, it's going to show, and it's going to start affecting the performances of the team, and it could cause them problems going into next season.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Haas technically haven't confirmed their driver lineup for next season, although we expect it to be exactly as it were. But it does raise questions that perhaps there are some concerns at the the figureheads at the Haas team that perhaps this driver pairing is just not going to work out. As I said, we'll have to wait and see. Of course, there's still a seat at Alfa Romeo. I don't know how that's going to unfold. Of course, we're expecting perhaps someone like Guan Yu Zhou to be confirmed in that seat, or maybe Oscar Piastri, who's doing a remarkable job in F2, getting another big win this weekend in the F2 feature race. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, for me, 3 stars for Mick. You want to give him more for a P15 given the state of the Haas, but it was a bit of a messy race for him, so I just don't think it'd be fair to give him higher than that. Mazepin, 1.5 stars. I know the expectations aren't high, but I think what we're seeing in Mazepin is the driver we feared we might see earlier in the season that was causing incidents and that. The only saving grace is that the only driver he seems to be having problems with right now is his teammate, because everyone else is nowhere near him. Not that that's something to sort of look at as a positive.
He's
but,
he's listening to blue flags now, though, so he's got that going for him.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That is the one solace. But at least it's an internal issue rather than something a bit beyond that. Because I think if you start upsetting other teams in this, then it becomes a bigger issue for Haas. At least it's something they only have to deal amongst themselves. But guys, let us know what you think on everything that we've talked about. Obviously, the Verstappen-Hamilton incident being the huge talking point. But, let us know what you think about the other things. How happy were you to see McLaren be so successful today? How do you think the championship is going to go down for the rest of the season? Of course, feel free to give us some of your star ratings as well. Just a bit of a note. Obviously, we've been very, very active this year. We've been putting out almost 2 episodes every single week. This weekend, there's not going to be an episode this weekend. We don't have a race on, but owing to how busy that Courtney and I have been, and obviously, as you could probably tell from this podcast, that we're not feeling 100% at the moment, we'd like to ask your forgiveness that we can take this weekend off, and we'll come back fresh and ready with a race preview for the Russian Grand Prix early next week. So please do bear with us. In the meantime, guys, of course, if you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving us a like if you've enjoyed the video. And of course, don't forget to engage with us on either the comment section or on social media. We'll be happy to engage with you there. And of course, if you have enjoyed this episode on your favorite podcasting platform, do feel free to follow us and like the episode, and of course share it around. If there are other F1 fans that want to join in the DNF1 community, please do encourage them to do so. We'd love to increase our following and engage with more and more followers in this F1 community, the best community in the world bar none, that I can say. Courtney, before we wrap this up, is there anything else you want to add in before we put this episode to bed?
Just as we said earlier, please feel free to engage with us. Don't be shy. We'd love to hear different opinions. But just leave the driver slander out of it, because we do like to debate. But I just ridiculous name calling and stuff, that I don't have any time for that. So
no.
Please engage.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is kind of the thing, because we avoid social media when, like yesterday, I was on social media when I saw it all go down. I was not going to dare to write anything down to try and weigh on the incident because of the barrage of responses from whether you're in the Hamilton camp or the Verstappen camp. You just don't want to lend yourself to that. And I saw so much going on that even respected pundits, like Paul di Resta, like I know Paul di Resta's not the most popular person in F1 media. I get that. But I do feel that a lot of the abuse that was thrown at him owing to his opinion on the incident where he deemed it a racing incident was very unfair. And then Johnny Herbert weighs in and, he was very much emphatic that Max was at fault. And then Massa weighs in and like to defend, say it was 50-50. And then you've got Damon Hill and everyone else. It's like everyone is bringing something to this battle where we're trying to debate and discuss an incident between the two leading championship protagonists. And then you've got everyone else on social media literally slating off or, saying this, that, and everything else about someone just because, or throwing hate at them just because they have an opinion that contraries their own or isn't favourable to their favourable driver. So, look, we want to create a space on here in the DNF1 hub on YouTube or social media or whatever, where you guys can feel comfortable to just engage with us and talk to us and talk to each other, if you like, in open debate about these things, about the sport that we all love so much. But we want to keep it respectable. We don't want to have arguments breaking out in the chats or anything like that where people are making fun or saying horrible things to each other just because they're pro Max or pro Lewis or pro someone else. It honestly doesn't matter. Just some healthy engagement, a little bit of banter here and there is absolutely fine, but let's keep it respectable, guys. I know I can trust you to do that. I'm just saying, because after an incident like this, everybody comes out with their pitchforks and literally, it's not a fun place sometimes. Anyway, look, enough of me ranting on and sounding like a depressed parent or anything like that. Until next time, guys, please do stay safe, I should say. Enjoy the weekend, however you choose to spend it, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, where we'll be previewing the Russian Grand Prix. So until next time, guys, take care.
See you soon.